Highways and Byways with Drew Crosby.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Highways and Byways on Vaughan Radio. It's Drew here. We're ready to go with another program where we will begin with business. It's always business at the beginning, isn't it? And this is how we do it, because today we're going to look at a home improvement store, the story behind this business, which has been and continues to be very, very successful. We'll look at the men behind the Home Depot, Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus, and we'll do this today in business. Interesting story, how they got their revenge and made this a very, very successful business. The Home Depot, it's Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus today in business. Later on, of course, in music, we'll go back to 1989 and look at 3 number one singles if we have time. There's no rush, but I think we probably will have time to look at these 3 number one singles from 1989. I'll Be Loving You Forever. The next song, Listen to Your Heart. And the third song, Good Thing. We may or may not do them in that order, but that's what we'll do in the second half hour today. Later on, Americana. Today we'll look at the artist Jasper Johns. I love his work, and I thought we would discuss this in detail today. Jasper Johns, considered to be one of the most important artists from the United States. He is very interesting, and we'll look at him in Americana today. Thirst for Knowledge will stay over there in the United States. Today's person is Andrew Jackson. We'll look at Andrew Jackson today in Thirst for Knowledge. And I think that's time. Well, that should be it. We might have time for some Dateline, a few items that took place on a day like today, but that should do it. All of this on today's Highways and Byways. Business. And in business, as I just mentioned, we're going to look at the store called the Home Depot. What's a depot? Scritto depot. What is a depot? Well, a depot is sort of like a warehouse, where you store things. In this case, it's like a hardware store. I was talking to my son the other day about a hardware store. He asked me, Dad, what's a hardware store? And I said, son, it's where you go buy tools, hammers, saws, chisels, screwdrivers, not software, hardware. And it's like a very, very big hardware store, but of course it's more than that. It's a home improvement shop. Now, this is something we talked about several months ago on the program, and I had a debate with a listener about what we call or how we call these shops, because she was saying it's a DIY, it's a do-it-yourself shop. And I say, no, it's not. I said, it's a home improvement shop. Looking around, we're both right. It's like a DIY, do-it-yourself, or a home improvement shop. It's called Home Depot. You go there for everything. If you want to paint your wall, you go to the Home Depot. If you want to remodel your basement, you go to the Home Depot. If you want to put a new sink in your bathroom, you go to the Home Depot. All right, you go to these home improvement shops. I'm saying Home Depot today because this is the business we're looking at. All right, it's enormous, it's huge, it's humongous, and of course it's a chain. All right, we talk about the number of franchises there are in the United States. I've lost count. Also, it's located around the world, and I was shocked to see it's located in China. So the Home Depot now growing in China as well. Now, this is what they call hyperstores or superstores or megastores. How many prefixes do we need to indicate that this is a big shop? It's a big shop. Mega, hyper, super. Well, it's clear that this is a mega-style home improvement store. It's called the Home Depot. And today we're going to look at the founders of this business, Mr. Bernie Marcus and Mr. Arthur Blank. These two gentlemen were instrumental in putting this business together. So they are the people we will look at today, the story behind these two men. Now, when they first began their business, they thought, now what do we do? I don't know what to do. What are you going to do? What are you going to do, Arthur? I don't know. What are you going to do, Bernie? I don't know. They fired us. Yeah, they were fired. Fired. You're fired. Remember, the verb to fire is to take somebody and put them on the street. In other words, it's to no longer allow them to work at the organization. And I love all of the words out there for fire, the politically correct words for fire, right? You've been let go, right? We're going to let you go. That's always a good one. All right. Actually, didn't we see that last week, Tino? Didn't we see that phrasal verb last week? I thought we did, to let go. We're going to let you go. Phrasal verb, to let go. Yeah, that sounds really nice, doesn't it? We're going to let you go. You're going to let me go? What, are you going to release me? No, we're going to fire you. So to let somebody go is a very politically correct way. It's a nice way of saying we're going to fire you. Well, these two men were fired. Yeah, they were fired from a place called Handy Dan. If you're handy, what does it mean? What does that mean if you're handy? Some of you listeners are very handy, right? The sink's leaking again. Yeah, the sink's leaking. Is anybody out there? Is anybody handy? Can I get somebody who's handy? Well, think about it. It's the same in Spanish, isn't it? All right, if you are good at fixing things, you're handy. Think about the word. Think about the word hand, just like in Spanish. If you're good at fixing things, you're handy. And they worked at a hardware store called Handy Dan Home Center. This is another generic term we use in the United States, home center. It's a home center. If you don't know what this means, I imagine, unless you visited a home center. I would have no idea. If somebody said to me, yeah, this afternoon I have to go to a home center, what does that really mean? Well, a home center, exactly. It's one of these places where you go to buy things to improve your home. Paint, wood, lumber, electrical supplies, plumbing, anything that you need to improve your home. And so they were working at the Handy Dan, and then they were fired. Now, this goes back to the spring of 1978 when they were fired from their jobs. Okay, we're going back quite a while. And they thought, you know what? What are we going to do now? I feel like a has-been. I really do. They felt like has-beens. This is a good term. If you're a has-been, it means you're washed up. You're no longer useful in your business or in your life. All right. Think about how that works. So, of course, we're conjugating has been. All right. We're using the participle of the verb there, to be. Well, if you're a has-been, you're washed up. You're no longer useful. You're not going to continue to be useful around here. This is how they felt when they were fired from their jobs. So they said, well, hey, you know what? Let's look at this as an opportunity. We know the hardware business. Let's do something in the hardware world. Let's use our experience to create something new. And so this is what they decided to do. Now, they needed money, of course, to begin this job opportunity, this new business. And so they met with an investment banker. And, of course, when you need capital, you meet with bankers. They give you money. And their idea, this is what they had to do. They had to pitch their idea. Remember the word to pitch? I think of baseball. When you have to give your idea to somebody, when you're trying to sell an idea to somebody, you pitch it. You pitch it to them. Here you go. Look, I have this great idea. I think we should start a humongous hardware store. This is what they said. A humongous hardware store. Does anybody know what humongous means? Huge, big, very, very big, humongous. And so the investment banker said, okay, let's do it. It probably was not that easy. All right. But the idea was to have this enormous hardware store and have it sell everything. Lumber, plumbing supplies, anything you needed when you worked on a home improvement project. I would call this a one-stop shop. A one-stop shop, right? You only have to stop once. A lot of times in the old days, and it wasn't that long ago, in the old days, when you had to go visit 16 different stores for one project. Well, I need to go to that shop for the paint, and then I have to go to that other store for a hammer, and then I need this and I need that. So that's no longer the case. And so they wanted to create this large home improvement store. And the banker was impressed, and he gave them the money, and they were able to develop the business. They were able to turn it into a reality. Now, of course, they were very careful at researching markets. They talked to suppliers. They talked to real estate agents. Real estate. Real estate. What's real estate? Well, real estate is property. Real estate could be a building. It could be land. And of course, they had to speak to real estate agents. And they spoke to potential employees, people they were going to hire. All right. And they had their mission statement. You know, in business, a lot of times it's very important to write a mission statement. What's your mission? Well, here's my mission. It's right here. Yep, I'm going to begin a business, and this is my mission. It's right here. And so perhaps a banker, somebody who is going to invest in your business, a shareholder, will be able to read your mission statement and understand what the business is all about. So they did all of this work, and it was worth it. It paid off. You know, this strategy paid off. Hey, there's a phrasal verb. Tino, what do you pay off? That's true, to pay off. Phrasal verb. If something pays off, that means it was worth it. Hey, that investment strategy really paid off. Yep, it was. It was worth it. And 25 or 30 years later, of course, this Home Depot, this brand, this hardware store, this enormous home improvement center has grown to almost, maybe 900 stores. They probably have $40 or $50 billion in sales. I don't have the recent figures, but at that stage, when we talk about such high numbers, it probably really doesn't matter, because the story here is the story itself. The idea is to learn from the story. Now, let's go back to a book they wrote. Does anybody know what to do something from scratch? To do something from scratch, what does that mean? Yeah, well, we began the project from scratch, to do something from scratch. Most of you know this is one of the most basic English language expressions. To do something from scratch means to start from zero, to begin from nothing. The name of their book, because Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus wrote a book called Built from Scratch. And it's a book about how they began this business. And one of the reasons why they've been able to stay successful, remain successful, is because they change. They change. They realize the importance of change. And so every single day, they're very aware of the importance to change. In fact, Bernie Marcus, he says, never be satisfied with how things are. Right? You know this story. Some of you remember the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Who Moved My Cheese? Remember the story? The concept of that story is basically the same as this one. This is real, though. Who Moved My Cheese was a fictional story, right? This is a real story. But the concept of never being satisfied, you always have to get up in the morning and go look for your cheese, because when they take it away, hey, who moved my cheese? Well, we need to be ready to find some new cheese. And that was their philosophy. Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus, this was their philosophy. They said, look, if you don't change, you're a dead duck. And we don't want to be dead ducks. All right. So you have to wake up in the morning and wonder, who will destroy me today if I don't keep my eyes open? This was their philosophy. So they decided, look, we need experts. We need experts in order to remain competitive and successful. So one of the really interesting parts of the story is the people they hired. The people they hired. They had real life, real experts, people who knew their industry working at this shop, right? If you needed something, maybe you wanted to buy a sink, you went to the plumbing department. You talked to a plumber. You were actually going to buy something from a real plumber, all right? If you went to buy some lumber, remember the word lumber. Lumber is cut wood that you would need to build something. Well, you're talking to a carpenter. So wherever you went within the shop, you were going to talk to a professional. And this was a risk in terms of expenses. It's expensive to hire professionals. But these were the people they hired. So this was part of their policy. Their policy was to hire professionals. And it was expensive. But remember our phrasal verb, listeners? The decision paid off. The decision paid off. And people who worked for Home Depot, and even today, people who work for Home Depot have, they're treated very well. They have received very good payment plans or what we call salary packages because they receive stock options. All right. Now, it depends on what year we're talking about, but in general, this company has grown and grown and grown. So if you look at this, they call their employees associates, and they consider them to be an investment. A lot of the businesses we've looked at over the last 6 or 7 years on Highways and Byways, a lot of the business owners who have built successful businesses consider their employees to be investments. They take care of the employees, and they realize that they are part of the organization in terms of growing the organization. It's an investment. And so this is the way Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus have always viewed their employees. In fact, a lot of the people who work for Home Depot are very enthusiastic. These people don't stop working. In fact, Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus have had to limit their working hours. Whoa, don't work so hard. How many hours did you work last week? Let's see, 43, 48, 51, 54, 55 hours. What? You worked 55 hours last week? Slow down. You're going to get tired. Well, this was the case. Many managers working at the Home Depot were working many hours, perhaps too many hours in the eyes of Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus. And so they said, look, we need to issue a memo. Issue. Do you use that word? Do you use the verb issue, listeners, to issue? It's a good word. It's a good verb. This is a little secret. Issue is one of those verbs that if you start using, people are going to say, wow, her English is pretty good. Yeah, she knows words like issue, all right, which basically means to send, right? To issue a document, or to issue, in this case, a memo, basically means to release it, to present it, to make it public. And they issued a memo, which basically was about people needing a balanced life. That was it. The message, the main message of the memo was, look, people need a balanced life. Use your time better. Yeah, because they realized, look, if you're tired, you're not going to be a good employee. All right. So, interesting. Now, another interesting concept about the Home Depot and the way they develop employees has to do with the way they work. In other words, the way they receive their training. Everybody starts in the stores. Yeah, even if you're Mr. Top Executive or Mrs. Top Lawyer working for Home Depot, it doesn't matter. You will begin your training in the store. And there have been a couple cases at the Home Depot. There was one case where a lawyer didn't want to. The lawyer said, look, come on, are you serious? I have to begin my training in the store? I am a lawyer. I am not going to work in the shop. Oh, yes, you are. Yes, you are. Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus, the founders, the co-founders of the Home Depot, said, yes, you are. Everybody starts in the stores, including our legal department. Everybody who works in the legal department will begin training in stores. Okay. So the lawyer said, okay, I will. And of course, the advantage of this is that they learn what's going on the floor, day-to-day business, in other words, the relationship between employees and customers. So everybody begins that way at the Home Depot. Now, they also are very good at developing their relationship with vendors. Now, this is a great word, listeners. Vendor. Why is this a good word? It's a good word for two reasons. First of all, we can practice our V, because most people don't pronounce the V properly when you're learning English. You have to practice like Valencia, Vaughan, vendor, victory, vicariously. But a vendor is basically a supplier. And we use this term a lot in the United States. A vendor is somebody who sells you a good or a service. All right, so these become partners, right? If you own a store and you sell things, the things you sell in your store, you purchase from a vendor. Yeah, look, I sell water. I'm only selling 3 items in my shop. I have water, candy, and bread. Because really, at the end of the day, this is all people need in life, right? Candy, bread, and water. So I have my candy vendor, my bread vendor, and my water vendor. And my candy vendor comes and visits me once a week, and he says, Drew, do you need any candy? And I say, no, thank you, Pepe, I'm all set. He's a very good vendor. And then my water vendor comes and says, Drew, do you need any water? And I say, yes, I need 16 cases of water because it's been hot and people are thirsty. So I have a really special relationship with my water vendor because he is extremely important. And then, of course, I have the other vendor, okay? So the concept of vendor is basically somebody who supplies something to you. So the relationship that Home Depot has with its vendors is very special. They work together. They're partners. Some of the vendors, in fact, vendors will go work at Home Depot. In other words, the vendors that supply products to Home Depot will go into the company, will go into Home Depot and work there for a week, and vice versa. Vice versa. It's just like in Spanish. Vice versa, right? In other words, employees from Home Depot will go work at their suppliers' shops and headquarters. And it seems to work very well. So these are some of the ways that Home Depot works to improve their business. Now, they try to learn from their experiences, right? Of course. And they still, even today, they remember when they were fired, when Handy Dan fired these two men. Now, it taught them a lot of lessons. First of all, they realized, look, be careful with the kind of people you work with. All right, so when they hire people, they scrutinize people. In other words, the people who will eventually work for Home Depot are scrutinized very carefully. All right, but it's worth it in the end. They usually hire the right people. Now, going back, I find this interesting. Does anybody remember Ross Perot? Very well-known businessman and also someone who was interested in getting involved in politics. He tried to become I believe it was the Republican presidential candidate several years ago, back in the late 1980s. And Ross Perot he was a very successful businessman as well. Well, he made a mistake here, because if we go back to when this all began, when Mr. Marcus and Mr. Blank needed money, they went and had a meeting with Mr. Ross Perot. Ross Perot was going to lend them $2 million. He said, look, I will lend you $2 million if I get 70% of the business. That's right. Let me put it in a different way. If I get 70% of the business, I will give you $2 million. Okay. So Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus, they needed the money. They needed $2 million. It sounded like a pretty good deal. So they continued to negotiate with Ross Perot. And there was a question here. Bernie Marcus, during the negotiation, asked Ross Perot a question. And the question was, Mr. Perot, can I keep my 4-year-old Cadillac? Yeah, apparently this was an issue. Apparently the fact that Mr. Marcus was driving a 4-year-old Cadillac was an issue. And do you know what Ross Perot said? He said, my people don't drive Cadillacs. He said this over and over because he was going to own the business. Well, I imagine if he was going to own the business, he was going to provide policy. He was going to establish the rules. So Mr. Perot said, my people don't drive Cadillacs. And Mr. Blank and Mr. Marcus looked at each other every time Ross Perot said this. And they said, you know what? We do not want to do business with Mr. Ross Perot. They knew it was not going to work. They said, if Mr. Perot is bothered by what kind of car I drive, can you imagine how much aggravation he's going to cause when we begin working together? That was a big loss for Mr. Perot, because Mr. Perot, remember, he was going to invest $2 million in the business. How much money would he have made? He would have made, or at least he would have earned on paper, $58 billion. Yeah, that is unbelievable. That is unthinkable. Mr. Perot, that $2 million investment was worth $58 billion in 1999. And so Ross Perot was the big loser there simply for insisting that Marcus couldn't drive a 4-year-old Cadillac. But anyway, of course, we know they received financing. Now, when you receive financing, and they've learned their lessons, one of the most important lessons they learned when looking for money to finance a business is whatever you think you need, double it. Right? Let's say, for example, I need 100 euros. For example, I need 100 euros to begin my business. No, I don't. I need 200. Right? According to their strategy, we should double it. So if you and I, listeners, let's say we're going to begin a business and we're going to sell windows. Sounds like a good business, doesn't it? We're going to go to Missouri. We're going to go where tornadoes have been hitting, and we're going to start selling windows. And we need $10,000 to begin our business. No, we don't. No, we don't. We probably need $20,000. We need double, all right, according to the strategy here of Mr. Marcus and Mr. Blank. So that's basically the story today. It goes on and on and on, but I think we understand the basics of just how successful this business has been. It's the home improvement business called Home Depot, and of course these two men became billionaires. The good news is they've been giving their money away to charities, and so that's good news. Of course, they will remain billionaires. But every year they give away millions and millions to good causes. So that's the story in the first half hour today in business. It's the Home Depot. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back.